Okay, ever get that, like, nagging pain when you're working out? Or maybe even, like, after. It just won't quit.
Yeah, definitely.
We're gonna go deep today. Tendinopathy. It's so common. Affects the tendons. Maybe you've even felt it yourself.
It's definitely a familiar feeling for a lot of people.
Or maybe you know someone who's dealing with it.
Right. Could be a friend or family member. It's really widespread.
So for this deep dive, we've got some great research articles and we're gonna break it all down.
Absolutely, yeah.
So first off, like, what is tendinopathy?
Well, think of it as this activity-related pain, right? And it basically messes with how well your tendons can do their job.
Mm.
And the thing is, it's a clinical diagnosis.
Mm.
So it's all about what you're feeling and what the doctor finds when they examine you. No fancy blood tests or anything like that.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And this isn't just like one specific spot.
Oh, no. This thing can pop up all over.
Yeah.
You can get it in your shoulders, your elbows,
Yeah.
your wrists,
Yeah.
even down in your legs.
Oh.
Achilles tendon, you've probably heard of that one.
Yeah.
Around your knee, that's patellar tendinopathy. And even your glutes can be affected.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's pretty common, especially in sports. Like, those volleyball players.
Mm-hmm.
Knee tendinopathy. It's a big problem for them.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, it makes up like almost a third of all those elite sports injuries.
Wow.
30%. It's a lot. And it's not just athletes. Think about people with jobs that demand a lot physically.
Right.
Manual laborers,
Hmm.
musicians, even surgeons. Tendinopathy is a real concern.
It's kind of scary how common it is.
Yeah, definitely. That's why we wanted to dive into this. We'll look at the science, how to manage it, new findings on tendon repair, and maybe even some future therapies.
Like probably coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, exactly. So to start, let's get into what this actually feels like. What does a person with tendinopathy experience?
Yeah, good question. Like, what are the red flags?
Well, pain, obviously. But it's not just any pain.
Okay.
It's a very specific kind of pain. It's triggered by activity. And it's usually right around the affected tendon. So it's localized. You'll also probably feel some stiffness in the area.
Right.
And this is interesting. The pain often lessens while you're actually doing the activity, but then, boom, it hits you even harder afterward, like later that day or the next morning. And sometimes you wake up with that stiffness again.
So it's kind of like a delayed reaction.
In a way, yeah. Like your body's trying to tell you something.
And does it stay mild? Or like, does it tend to worsen over time?
Well, at first, it might be off and on, intermittent.
Mm-hmm.
But, if you keep stressing that tendon, it can get a lot worse.
Oh, no.
The pain becomes constant. And eventually, it can be really debilitating. It can affect your whole life.
That's so frustrating. So how do you even know if it's tendinopathy?
Well, as I said, it's clinical. We start with a physical exam.
Okay.
For some tendons, like your Achilles, it's pretty straightforward. The doctor can just feel it, check for any sickening. Or if it's tender to the touch, but for deeper tendons, it's a bit trickier. They'll have you move in certain ways, try to make the pain flare up. That helps them pinpoint which tendon is the problem.
Interesting. But what about all the imaging technology we have now?
Ah, you're thinking ultrasounds,
Yeah.
MRIs, all that.
Exactly. Can't those just, like, show you exactly what's wrong?
You'd think so, right. But it's not so simple. Imaging can definitely reveal things like tears in the tendon, or if it's thickened.
Okay.
But sometimes those changes don't really match up with the symptoms. You can have a pretty bad-looking MRI, but hardly any pain. Or the other way around.
Yeah.
Your scan seems fine, but you're in agony.
Really? So those scans aren't the be-all and end-all?
Right. It's like having a map. It shows you the landscape, but it doesn't tell you what the weather's like or if there's traffic. You need the whole picture.
Got it.
And that includes how much pain you're in, what makes it worse, and how it's affecting your life.
I see. So it's more than just a snapshot.
Exactly. But there are some newer imaging techniques that are pretty exciting.
Oh, like what?
Things like UTC, it's like an ultrasound, but way more detailed. You get a much clearer picture of the tendon structure, almost like a high-definition map.
Cool.
And then there's sonar elastography. It measures how stiff the tendon is. And all of this might help us get better at diagnosing tendinopathy, figuring out who's at risk, and even seeing how well treatments are working.
Okay, so we've talked about what it is, how it feels, and how it's diagnosed. Now for the big question, like, what causes it? What's actually happening inside to make this happen?
Well, this is where it gets really fascinating, because it's not just one thing.
Right.
It's a whole bunch of factors all coming together.
Okay.
We call it multifactorial. Obviously, overuse is a big one, doing too much too soon,
Yeah, that makes sense.
or repetitive strain.
Right.
But there are also things like smoking,
Oh, wow.
that can affect your tendons.
Okay.
And then there are metabolic conditions, diabetes, high cholesterol, even genetics.
Really? So some people are just more prone to it.
Seems that way. And we can't forget medications,
Oh, yeah, like you mentioned before.
some antibiotics, and even long-term use of corticosteroids. Those have been linked to tendinopathy too. And then there are changes happening at the cellular level, inside the tendon, nerves sending weird signals, cells dying off too quickly, an imbalance in inflammation, and even problems with how the tendon produces its structural components. It's a whole mess.
So it's like all these things just gang up on the poor tendon.
You got it. And scientists have come up with different theories to try and explain it all.
Okay, interesting. You mentioned a couple big ones, like what is the failed healing theory?
Right. So that one comes from Fu and his colleagues. Their idea is it all starts with an injury.
Okay.
Could be a sudden big stress, or those tiny repetitive ones we talked about. But here's the key. The environment around the tendon has to be right for it to heal properly.
Like, what do you mean?
Well, think of it like a plant. It needs good soil, the right amount of water, sunlight. The tendon needs the right conditions too. But if something's off, like the mechanical load is too much,
Right.
or there's too much oxidative stress, or some medication is messing things up,
Yeah.
then the healing goes haywire.
It gets off track.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that can lead to all sorts of changes. The collagen gets messed up, weird proteins show up,
Yeah.
blood vessels and nerves start growing where they shouldn't. It's chaos. And eventually, you get pain,
Yeah.
tendon weakens, and might even rupture. It's like you're trying to build a house, but you're using the wrong materials or the foundation's cracked. It's not going to end well.
That's a perfect analogy. Okay, what about the continuum model? How does that one work?
So that one comes from Cook and his team. They see tendinopathy as a progression, like a spectrum with 3 stages. It starts with reactive tendinopathy.
Reactive. What does that mean?
It's actually a good thing initially. The tendon's basically trying to adapt to a sudden increase in load.
Okay.
The cells start multiplying. The matrix thickens. It's like the tendon's bulking up, trying to protect itself.
So it's kind of like when you start lifting weights and your muscles get bigger.
Exactly. But if the overload continues, you move into the next stage. Tendon disrepair.
Disrepair. That sounds ominous.
Yeah, it's not good. Now the matrix starts to break down.
Huh.
The cells are still multiplying, but they're disorganized. And the collagen, it's not being laid down properly. Plus, you get those new blood vessels and nerves growing in, adding to the mess.
So it's like the body's trying to fix it, but it's just making things worse.
Right. It's a failed repair job. And finally, you reach the last stage, degenerative tendinopathy.
Yikes.
This is where the real damage sets in. Cells start dying off.
Like completely.
Apoptosis, programmed cell death.
Oh.
The remaining cells are exhausted, they can't keep up, and the matrix is just a jumbled mess.
So it's basically irreversible at that point.
Pretty much.
That's a scary thought.
Yeah. But remember, this continuum model, it's not perfect. It doesn't really acknowledge the role of inflammation. And a lot of other research shows that inflammation is a big part of tendinopathy.
Right. Okay, so regardless of which theory we're looking at, what's actually going on inside the tendon at like a cellular level? What are the specific changes?
Well, if you were to take a peek under a microscope,
Yeah.
you'd see that the collagen fibers, which are normally nice and organized, become all tangled and fragmented. And the type of collagen changes too. You get less of the strong type I collagen and more of type 3, which is weaker.
Not good.
No. And then there's the neovascularization.
Neovascularization, say that again?
Neovascularization. It's when you get these new blood vessels forming.
Yeah.
And neoinnervation. That's new nerve growth. Both of these are happening where they shouldn't be.
So basically, the tendon is becoming weaker, more disorganized, and there are all these extra blood vessels and nerves popping up where they don't belong.
Exactly.
Right.
And researchers are really trying to understand how this all happens. They've identified things like scleraxis and Mohawk homeobox protein. Those are key players in controlling type I collagen production.
So they're like the foreman on a construction site, making sure the right materials are used.
Perfect analogy.
And we can't forget the other stuff in the matrix.
Right. Besides collagen, there's elastin, glycoproteins, proteoglycans,
A whole alphabet soup?
pretty much. But they're all important. They help build the matrix, and they influence how the tendon cells grow and function.
I see. So like a team effort. And what about that oxidative injury you mentioned? What role does that play?
Well, when a tendon is injured, it starts producing these things called reactive oxygen species.
Reactive oxygen species.
They're basically unstable molecules that can damage cells. and that can lead to apoptosis.
Which is cell death, right?
Correct. Programmed cell death.
And you're saying these reactive oxygen species are causing the tendon cells to, like, self-destruct?
Yeah. They're triggering that process. And studies have shown increased levels of certain enzymes, called caspases, in damaged tendons. Caspases are like the executioners of apoptosis.
Wow. So it's not just mechanical breakdown. There's also this internal cellular process that's contributing to the damage.
Exactly. And it's not just the cells that are affected. Even the mitochondria, those are the powerhouses of the cells.
Yeah.
They don't function properly in tendinopathy. And we see an upregulation of BNIP3.
What's BNIP3?
It's a protein that's linked to cell death and mitochondrial dysfunction.
Okay. So like a double whammy.
Pretty much. And then there's nitric oxide.
Ah, I've heard of that. Isn't that involved in, like, blood flow?
It is. And it's also involved in inflammation. And we see an increase in nitric oxide production in tendinopathic tissues.
Huh. So is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It's complicated. Nitric oxide can contribute to inflammation, but it can also stimulate the production of certain matrix components.
So it's like a double-edged sword.
Exactly. It could be helpful or harmful, depending on the context.
Makes sense. And it sounds like there are also all these internal communication pathways that get messed up in the tendon cells.
Right. There are these signaling pathways within the cells, like the Wnt pathway and the NFKB pathway. They get disrupted in tendinopathy. And other pathways, like ERK12 and P38, they play a role in how the tendon cells behave.
So, like, the phones are down, the emails are bouncing back, the whole communication system's a mess.
That's a great way to put it. And on top of all that, we have to consider genetics.
Right, you mentioned that before. So some people are just predisposed to this.
It seems that way. There are variations in genes like CL5A1, MMP3, TMP2, and tennescin C. Those all play a role in tendon health and healing.
And those variations make people more susceptible.
Exactly. It might be that their tendons just don't handle stress as well,
Yeah.
or they don't repair as effectively.
Fascinating. Okay, so I've got overuse, genetics, all this cellular chaos. What about inflammation? You mentioned that the continuum model didn't really address it. What's the latest on that?
Well, it's becoming clear that inflammation is a key player in tendinopathy. It's not just about the tendon fibers breaking down. There's this complex interplay with the immune system. Studies have shown that immune cells, like macrophages and mast cells, they actually infiltrate the tendon.
Really? They go in there?
Yeah, and they release these inflammatory molecules called cytokines and chemokines.
And that's a bad thing.
Well, it can be. It can create a kind of chronic low-grade inflammation within the tendon. And that further disrupts its structure and function.
So it's like the immune system, which is supposed to be helping, is actually making things worse.
Right. It's like your body's trying to fight off an enemy that's not really there.
Oh, I see. And are there any specific inflammatory molecules that seem to be particularly important?
There are a few. IL-1 beta, IL-4, IL-6, and TNF-alpha. Those have all been implicated. But one that's getting a lot of attention is IL-17.
IL-17, what does that one do?
It might play a role in how the matrix is remodeled. And it might even trigger the release of other inflammatory cytokines.
So it's kind of like a troublemaker.
You could say that. Some researchers are even looking at whether blocking IL-17 could be a potential treatment.
Interesting. That's like cutting off the head of the snake. And you mentioned alarmins earlier.
Oh, right.
What are those?
Exactly. So alarmins, they're basically like danger signals. When cells are damaged or die, they release these proteins. And that alerts the immune system like, hey, something's wrong here.
Come fix this.
Exactly. And that can contribute to the development of tendinopathy.
It's amazing how much is going on at this tiny level.
Yeah, it's a whole world in there.
Okay, so we've got mechanical stress, genetics, cellular changes, inflammation. But let's talk about the main thing. The pain.
Ah, yes, the pain.
That's what brings people to the doctor in the first place.
Absolutely.
But it's weird, right? Like, the amount of pain someone has doesn't always match up with what you see on the scans.
That's one of the big mysteries. You can have someone with a really messed up tendon on the MRI, but their pain is manageable. And then you have others, their scan looks fine, but they're in agony.
It's like, what's the deal?
It's still not fully understood, but it seems like it's not just about how much damage there is, it's about how the tendon changes over time.
This is like a slow burn.
Yeah. And then there are specific molecules that are involved in pain signaling.
Okay.
Glutamate, for example.
Oh, like the stuff in food.
It's actually a neurotransmitter. It plays a role in how nerves communicate. And in tendinopathy, we see increased levels of glutamate and its receptors. And then there are other molecules involved in nerve sensitivity, like substance P.
And these are making the nerves more sensitive to pain.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
you've got the structural damage in the tendon, but you've also got these changes in the nerves that are amplifying the pain signals.
It's so complex.
It really is.
Okay, now for the million-dollar question, like what can be done about it?
Well, the current approaches fall into two main
Buckets.
categories. We've got active rehabilitation, which is mostly about exercise.
Okay.
And then we have various interventions.
Like what kinds of interventions?
Things like injections,
Hmm?
corticosteroids, for example,
Ah.
or PRP, platelet-rich plasma. And there's iontophoresis, shockwave therapy, laser therapy, ultrasound.
So it's like a whole toolbox.
It is.
But where do you even start?
The first step is figuring out what caused the tendinopathy in the first place.
Right. Makes sense.
Was there a sudden increase in activity,
Mm-hmm.
a previous injury,
Yeah.
any medication changes?
You mentioned some meds can trigger it.
Exactly. And then there's family history, things like inflammatory arthritis, and other medical conditions too.
Oh, yeah, like diabetes.
Right. Smoking, high cholesterol, obesity,
Yeah.
those can all affect tendon health.
So it's like detective work.
It is.
Okay, so then what about exercise? You mentioned eccentric loading as a common recommendation.
Yeah, that's a big one. It's all about gradually increasing the load on the tendon,
Okay.
but it has to be done carefully. It needs to be tailored to the individual and based on evidence-based principles.
So not just any old exercise routine.
Right. And eccentric loading is where the muscle lengthens while it's under tension.
So like slowly lowering a weight.
Perfect example.
Hmm.
And this has been shown to be really effective for a lot of tendinopathies, especially in the lower limbs.
Like Achilles and patellar?
Yep. But also for some upper limb conditions like tennis elbow.
What about isometric exercises? Those are where you hold a contraction, right?
That's right. You're activating the muscle but not actually moving the joint.
Okay.
Some studies have shown they can help, maybe by reducing pain and allowing athletes to keep training.
Okay.
But the research is mixed. We need more studies to really know how effective they are across the board.
And then there's that heavy, slow resistance training.
HSRT.
What's the deal with that one?
So the idea is you use heavier weights but do fewer reps.
Okay.
And you do it slowly and with control. The theory is that this puts more stress on the tendon, and that can lead to adaptation and strengthening.
Interesting.
But again, more research is needed.
Got it. What about those corticosteroid injections? Those seem pretty common.
They are, and they can be helpful for short-term pain relief. But their long-term effectiveness is a bit of a debate. Some studies haven't shown any lasting benefits, and there's even concern that steroids might actually weaken the tendon. So they're used cautiously, mainly to manage symptoms in the short term.
Okay. What about topical treatments, like those glycerol trinitrate patches?
GTN. Yeah, that's an interesting one. It's a vasodilator.
What?
It widens your blood vessels. And there's some evidence that it can improve pain in the short term. And some studies have shown benefits lasting up to 6 months. The downside is that it can cause headaches.
Oh, right.
So it's not for everyone.
And then you have things like PRP and shockwave therapy. Those seem kind of high tech.
They are.
Yeah.
PRP is platelet-rich plasma.
Yeah.
It's basically concentrating your own platelets and injecting them into the tendon. The idea is that the platelets will release growth factors and stimulate healing. But the evidence is still pretty shaky. And then shockwave therapy.
Yeah, that sounds intense.
It is. They use a machine to deliver these shockwaves to the tendon.
And what does that do?
We don't fully understand the mechanism, but it might trigger some inflammatory and catabolic processes,
Catabolic.
breaking down, and that might help with remodeling the tendon.
So it's like breaking it down to build it back up.
Yeah, something like that. It's
Yeah.
generally considered safe, but more research is needed.
Okay. What about those less invasive therapies, like laser therapy and ultrasound?
So low-level laser therapy, or LLLT, uses light to reduce inflammation and promote healing. There's some evidence that can help with tendinopathy, but more research is definitely needed.
Okay.
And ultrasound.
Yeah, that's another one I've heard about.
There have been some encouraging results, especially for Achilles tendinopathy. But again, more research is needed to confirm those findings.
Got it. Seems like we still have a lot to learn.
We do.
So at what point do you even consider surgery? Like, is that a last resort?
Surgery is generally reserved for cases that don't respond to conservative treatment. The aim is to try to regenerate healthy tendon tissue.
Okay.
And the procedures can vary a lot. You have open surgery, minimally invasive techniques, arthroscopy.
Wow, so many different options. But Is surgery actually more effective than physiotherapy?
That's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, the evidence isn't really there.
Really?
Yeah. For Achilles tendinopathy, there aren't even any good studies comparing surgery to non-surgical treatment.
Wow.
And for other types like patellar tendinopathy, lateral elbow tendinopathy,
Yeah.
the research shows that surgery is no better than eccentric exercises or even placebo surgery.
Placebo surgery.
Yeah, they basically just make an incision, but they don't actually do anything to the tendon.
Wow, that's crazy.
And even for shoulder tendinopathy, the evidence for surgery is weak.
So basically, across the board, surgery isn't the magic bullet we might think it is?
That's the takeaway. It's always best to try conservative management first. At least 12 months of loading therapy before you even think about surgery.
Okay, that's really important to know. So looking ahead, what's on the horizon? Any exciting new treatments in development?
There are some really interesting things in the pipeline.
Like what?
Well, one area that's getting a lot of attention is biologic therapies.
Biologic therapies. What are those?
They're basically trying to harness the body's own healing power. One example is scaffolds.
Scaffolds, like construction scaffolds?
Kind of. They're materials that provide support for the tendon cells to grow and regenerate the matrix.
Ah, so they're like a framework for the tendon to rebuild itself on.
Exactly. The research started with natural scaffolds, but now they're looking at synthetic materials.
Interesting.
The problem is the results haven't been consistent so far, and some scaffolds have even caused inflammation, so there's still work to be done.
Okay. What about gene therapy? That sounds pretty futuristic.
It is. It's still experimental. But the idea is to introduce genetic material into the tendon cells.
To change their DNA?
Well, not exactly change it, but to influence which proteins they produce.
Okay.
And the goal is to promote healing. They've had some promising results in animal studies,
Wow.
but we're a long way from using it in humans.
And what about stem cells?
Ah, stem cells.
Yeah.
They're like the rock stars of regenerative medicine.
I heard so much about them.
They have the potential to turn into different types of cells.
Yeah?
And there's some evidence that they can help repair tendons.
How do they do that?
Well, it might be through the release of signaling molecules, things like exosomes.
Exosomes.
Yeah, they're these tiny vesicles that cells use to communicate with each other.
So it's like tiny little messages going back and forth.
Exactly.
Wow.
And they seem to be pretty safe and effective.
It's incredible to think about all this like cellular communication going on.
It is. It's a whole microscopic world in there.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that most of this research has focused on acute tendon injuries, like ruptures.
Ah.
But we need more research on chronic degenerative tendinopathy.
Right, because that's way more common.
Exactly.
So lots of potential for future therapies.
Yeah. There's a lot to be excited about.
It's amazing how much we're learning about this condition,
It is.
but it's clear that tendinopathy is incredibly complex.
Absolutely.
And even with all the research, there's still so much we don't know.
That's true. But we're making progress. And one thing that's crystal clear is that exercise is key.
Right, those loading programs.
Exactly. That's the foundation of treatment. And then we can add on these other therapies depending on the individual case.
Okay.
And the research into those therapies is constantly evolving.
It's exciting.
It is. And it shows how important it is to keep pushing the boundaries of science.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive, lots to think about. And for all of you listening, here's something to ponder. We've talked about how mechanical stress, biology, and even our genes all play a role in tendinopathy.
Right.
But what other factors might be at play?